Cait, welcome into the back room.
Thanks so much, Andy. Stoked to be here. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation.
So let's start off with your background. Let's begin with high school. Like a lot of people, you watched the Twin Towers fall in the 9/11 attack. Tell us how that horrible day changed your life.
Well, to your point, so many of us here in the Hudson Valley felt that day in very personal ways. And I think Americans across the country felt that day. But I'll never forget sitting in English class in 11th grade, junior in high school, and watching the towers fall on TV. And that night is when I went home and I told my mom, if they want to fight, that's where I belong. What just happened, we can't let happen again. And the values that my family instilled in me, that the Hudson Valley as a community instilled in me. We come from blue collar roots that go back 4 generations here. My great grandfather and grandfather, they worked in the brickyards outside of Montrose. My dad, construction worker. My mom spent the U.S. Postal Service for 48 years, serving communities up and down the Hudson Valley. And it's those values of working hard, fighting for what matters, having the courage to do the right thing and to stand up. That's what my community, my family taught me. So when 9/11 happened, for me, the next steps and my responsibility to fight and serve was clear. And, I give G.I. Jane and Demi Moore tremendous credit because that movie growing up, showed me it was possible for women to fight. And so that's what I did. Went to West Point, graduated at the top of my class, went off to serve 16 years in the U.S. Army as an active duty Army officer, over a decade of that in the special operations community. So a lot of the stuff I did, I can't talk about, but the stuff I can, I did 6
Or just
unclassified.
send us a signal text.
Or maybe they'll leak my records. I
Yeah.
go for it. I am so proud of what we've done.
Hmm.
But I did 6 combat tours I can talk about,
Hmm.
in terms of we literally went to the most dangerous places to hunt down the most brutal terrorists that threaten the safety and security of Americans here at home and around the world.
Hmm.
And Andy, I think this goes back to people who've lived their lives solving hard problems in places where the stakes could not be higher, right? And I have to tell you, the privilege of my lifetime has been leading America's sons and daughters in defense of this nation.
Hmm.
And it is that kind of feeling, right? That sense of responsibility to fight for what matters. That's certainly what inspired me to take on this next fight.
And you were the only person to go to college in your family or graduate from college. Is that correct?
Andy, when I say I live the American dream, I mean, neither of my parents graduated from college. I got to go to West Point, earn master's degree from Harvard, MIT. I got to work at the White House as the director for counterterrorism, and I just turned 40, right? Like I'm ready to go. And it is that spirit of truly in America, you have boundless opportunities for your future that I think is so, so special and why people all over the world try to come here because of the American dream. But I
Hmm.
will say the American dream that I got to live feels way too distant and almost impossible for too many families here in the Hudson Valley. And that is us failing as America, if that is the reality that American working families are facing.
So you are running for Congress in New York's 17th district, which includes Rockland, Putnam, parts of Westchester, and Dutchess counties. The seat is currently held by Republican Representative Mike Lawler. It's a pretty crowded field in terms of Democrats vying for the nomination. What do you believe are the top 2 or 3 things that set you apart from your opponents?
I think my blue collar roots here in the Hudson Valley, I'm the only one born and raised here in this field who truly comes from blue collar working class roots. So when we talk about the struggles that families here in the Hudson Valley are facing right now, they're not hypotheticals or case studies for me. They're daily life. I have 2 sisters that can't afford to move home. I am dealing with the struggles of how do we pay for bills while continuing to serve. Like these are very real things for my family. And so when we talk about why I'm driven, the fire inside to fix this, to make America work for working families again, it's personal. I think this challenge is so important that I take on. Out of this field, I'm the only non-millionaire. And so when you talk about working people representing working Americans in Congress. I think that is missing. And because of that, Congress itself is failing working families. And so getting more people who get it, who have the struggles of balancing a checkbook, right? Balancing a budget and still trying to give your family opportunity, right? Not just survive, but try to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just so important here. I think the other part is, look, I'm the only one who stepped up and has fought to defend this nation, wearing the uniform, right? Serving overseas. And I think that being an Army Special Ops combat veteran who has truly gone out in the highest of stakes and delivered for this country is such an important part of building trust with people. And when you talk about elections and how people vote for who represents them, Andy, it's about trust, right? It's about people going in and saying, I believe that this person is going to do the best thing for me and my family. Even if we don't agree on every policy issue, they trust that I'm going to go out there and do what I've done my entire life, which is fight for this country that I love and do the right thing for this country and for working American families. And
Yeah.
that is what we need in this country right now. So much. And so when you look at Mike Lawler, he has faced two seasoned Democratic politicians and beaten them. Mike Lawler has never faced someone like me, a veteran who has gone out and delivered for this country time and time again. And that's what I'm going to do now.
Yeah, well, Mike Lawler knows he's vulnerable because he's rubber stamping everything Donald Trump is asking for. And a lot of that really severely negatively impacts his constituents in New York State. When you're a congressperson, you definitely wear a very important national hat, but you also are beholden to the folks back at home to provide for them and fight for them because they're the ones that sent you to Washington. We've just seen how Donald Trump has been weaponizing government to punish New York for counterterrorism resources with infrastructure projects like the Hudson River Tunnel Project and the Second Avenue Subway Project. So, how important are those issues to you, like infrastructure, which really directly impact New Yorkers, as well as the safety of our residents because of the cutbacks in policing and counterterrorism resources?
Andy, if Mike Lawler was the guy he claimed to be, I wouldn't be doing this, you know? But it is very clear that the only person Mike Lawler serves is himself. And you see that for exactly the reasons you just brought up. The fact that he has 100% of the time backed Trump in his agenda. He has failed to do his job in Congress in providing oversight to the executive branch at a time where we are seeing, to your point, the weaponization and politicization of the executive branch that is unprecedented in our lifetimes. Mike Lawler is not doing his job. There's a dereliction of duty. And in the Army, when you fail in that way, you get fired, right? There is accountability. And that is what next year is going to be accountability to Mike Lawler, who, under his watch, we have seen electricity prices for the Hudson Valley skyrocket. We've seen tens of thousands of residents here in the district about to get kicked off of Medicaid because of a budget bill he voted for. Mm-hmm. We are seeing tens of millions of dollars in reduction in programs like SNAP across the district, where here you have working families, right? We're talking about the health and wellness of our children, and he is ripping that away. And his job is to set the conditions for families here to thrive. And instead, he is willing to play partisan games and put their futures in jeopardy to advance his political ambitions. And that has been made abundantly clear. And that is where accountability is coming.
Yeah, well, his positions with regard to the shutdown in particular, healthcare, it's very important to his constituents, yet Democrats, as we are seeing, are fighting to extend the Obamacare subsidies and also trying to reverse the huge cuts to Medicaid that are in what I call the big ugly ass bill. I wish everybody would stop calling it the big beautiful bill. And so when you said he serves no one but himself, you're right, but he also serves Donald Trump. And I think that is going to get him in trouble in this next election because he's not representing New York State. And when you see him on TV in the interviews, I mean, he's a guy between a rock and a hard place. Like he knows the worst thing in the world is to know you're in trouble and not be able to do anything about it because you have pledged undying fealty to the king.
Yeah, I have no sympathy for him, Andy. He made his choice. And this goes back to what they teach you at West Point, right? It is choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. And I used to tell my soldiers something, doing the right thing when it's easy, that's just doing your job. Doing the right thing when it's hard, when it comes at risk, and potentially even personal harm or sacrifice, that is courage.
Yep.
And this nation was built on people who, in the hardest of moments and the darkest of hours, lived with courage. And that is what this nation needs again to navigate what are incredibly trying times. And instead, what we're seeing out of Mike Lawler is not courage, it is cowardice. It is a willingness to support a king or someone who claims to be a king. In America, in my country, there are no kings. The only fealty that you have is to the Constitution and to doing what is right for this country. And so my sympathies for him are non-existent. He has made his decisions to put, again, his own political ambitions and that of Trump's ahead of the wellness of Hudson Valley families. And that is unacceptable. To your point, this budget bill they passed earlier this year, tens of thousands of families, our most vulnerable right here in the district, are going to get kicked off. Because of their refusal to reinstate the premium tax credits, we're going to see healthcare premiums next year double for families here in the Hudson Valley at a time when we're facing an affordability crisis. How the hell is that doing what is best for working American families? It's unacceptable. And so, no, the cruelty has to roll back. We have to do what is best for working Americans where they're already facing a hard enough time. And what Mike Lawler is doing with his enablement of this administration is making it harder for working class families to get by.
Yeah, look, Democrats actually have a voter registration advantage in your district, and it went for Biden in 2020 and Harris in 2024, which means the seat is winnable. So how do you plan to flip that seat? What is your message to independent voters, to moderate Republicans, those that you can possibly win over?
So it's funny, Andy, when you look at how the map in New York has evolved over time. When I was growing up, New York 17 was in the Bronx,
Right.
right? So it's like every 10
Well,
years,
it's right. It's been so carved up.
yeah. So every 10 years we go through the census. Recently, New York's been losing seats, right? So we redraw the lines. So from 2011 to 2020, this district was basically two counties, Westchester and Rockland. And that's where you're right. In 2020, Joe Biden won this district by 10 points. But coming out of the 2021 redistricting, this New York 20 or New York 17 is fundamentally different. It's now four counties, not two. Like you said at the top of the podcast, we've got Rockland, Northern Westchester, all of Putnam and Southern Dutchess now. And so while there are more registered Democrats than Republicans, 28% of registered voters in New York 17 are unaffiliated or independent. And so for a Republican or Democrat, we can't win this district with just registered voters from our party alone. We have to be able to win people over a party. And that is exactly what I'm doing every single day. And the work across this district in every corner is meeting voters where they are. And when you look at what people are craving right now, I truly believe it is leadership. It is someone who is going to actually do the work to make their lives better, to address the issues that their families are facing, to make the American dream real again. Here in the Hudson Valley, I don't care how people are registered, they're facing the same problems. We have a housing crisis. People can't afford to buy homes. And when they get in homes, they can't afford to stay in them because we have things like electricity bills that are going up double digits over the next 3 to 5 years at a time where we already have families behind on their electric bills. You see how the cost of groceries under Mike Lawler's watch have gone up 20% in 3 years. You see how healthcare continues to be unaffordable, and a lack of employment opportunities here in the district to keep middle America here. And it is these problems that we must face and address. And when I go out there and I meet with folks. I mean, Andy, I think the biggest point of resonance is the non-bullshit factor. I'm not a
Hmm.
politician. I'm somebody who has got to live the American dream because I worked my ass off. And I've spent my entire life delivering for this country. And that is why I'm doing this, because it is too hard for my family. It is too hard for my friends' families. It's too hard for people. And that's unacceptable. Look, we've entered into an era where the economic prospects of young Americans are worse than their parents or grandparents for the first time in modern American history. That is America failing. You know, we're looking at significant disruptions to the workforce because of increased productivity that we're going to see coming out of AI, where we've already seen how the recent college graduate unemployment rate this summer exceeded that of the national average. These are very real problems that we must be addressing. But instead of doing that, we have an administration enabled by a Congress filled with people like Mike Lawler who don't actually care about solving the hard problems that they're responsible for. And instead, they're creating nonsense. They're focusing on nonsense. They're implementing cruelty.
Hmm.
And I think when I talk to folks, you know, it fills my heart because all they want is a government that functions. They want
Right.
a government that's going to fulfill its responsibilities. You know, for working Americans, they don't have the luxury of not doing their job, and neither should the American government. We just saw Pete Hegseth last week bring together America's top military leadership.
Yeah, if you could hold that, because I definitely want to get into that and a couple of other
Yeah.
things that speak to your
All right.
background. But I want to continue with the district just for a few minutes. New York 17 has a large Jewish population, an appreciable Orthodox Jewish population. This, as you know, and say this as a Jew, this is a big issue in this country today. We see how it's divided politics and politicians, the electorate, young people are incredibly engaged over it. We see Zohran Mamdani's successful mayoral campaign so far in New York City over this issue. A lot of my fellow Jews have been single issue voters. And so it's a very complicated situation. But how do you propose to speak to that community and their concerns? What are your positions on Israel and Gaza?
So during my time in uniform, right, 16 years, over a decade in special ops and numerous combat tours, I have worked extensively with the Israeli military, with the Israeli intelligence community. And I will tell you that America has no better partner in keeping Americans safe from the threat posed by terror groups around this world, from the threat of Iranian aggression, right? Iran, the largest purveyor of lethal aid to terror groups. We have no better partner than the state of Israel in keeping Americans safe from those threats. And I have personally seen where Israel has gone the extra mile to ensure the safety and security of Americans at their own risk, right, in their own peril. And so when you look at what happened on October 7th, I mean,
Today, by the way, as
uh,
we're recording this, the 2 year anniversary.
the 2 year anniversary where we saw 1,200 souls taken, right? In the most savage and brutal of ways. I've seen the photos. What happened on October 7th by Hamas, a terror organization against innocent men, women, and children, is fundamentally unacceptable.
Hmm.
That brutality and savagery has no place in this world. And when you look at what people suffered from, right, and those who continue to suffer, we still have 47 hostages that haven't been returned home. You know, on that attack, we lost American citizens. And so we cannot forget what initiated this conflict, which was a terror attack of extraordinary proportion
Hmm.
that resulted in the loss of innocence. Now, I say this as, again, someone who's put on the uniform and who has gone to war for my nation. When you look at what you were trying to achieve in conflict, you have to understand the full conditions and circumstances that are going to be essential into achieving those objectives. And right now, we have to do a better job of getting humanitarian aid delivered to those who need it. We have to focus on what are the political objectives that are going to lead to peace, right? Anyone who's been to war never wants to see others have to go to it. My worst day is seeing other American sons and daughters have to go off and fight because military force should be a last resort,
Hmm.
when all other options have been, attempted and proven futile. But we must be willing to use it when necessary. And I think going back to, look, we can't allow Hamas to conduct another October 7th terror attack on Israel. But we have got to get to a point where we can get humanitarian aid to the people who are suffering and need it. We have to make sure that we are working on conditions to deliver a two-state solution. And I think it's okay to have conversations about how we conduct war, right? And if our campaigns are effective or not. Look, we as Americans did that. Remember the Iraq War, Afghanistan. Those were constant discussions with policymakers, with military professionals about what do we need to do and how do we need to do it in order to be effective at where we're trying to get to, that desired peaceful end state. And so I think it is okay to have conversations about, are we being as effective as we need to be to achieve these objectives? But I think it's important to recognize how hard this situation is and how nuanced. When we talk about Israel, going back to what I'm really worried about too, is the fact that next to Israel, we have Iran, who is committed to getting a nuclear weapon. The largest purveyor of lethal aid to terror groups in this world is trying to get a nuclear weapon. That cannot happen. We're already seeing how Iran is enabling the war in Ukraine by providing Russia with suicide one-way UAVs that are devastating communities. I mean, what was it? Just days ago, we saw a 12-hour bombardment of Kyiv using missiles and drones.
Hmm. Hmm.
Iran enabled that. And so this is where, going back to why it matters so much to have members of Congress who understand the complexity and nuance of what is going on in this world, because none of this is easy. And I think, again, going back to why I'm doing this, look, I spent the last 20 years of my life learning how to fight and defend this nation, deliver hard results for this nation. The last 4 years, I was the director for counterterrorism at the White House, and then went off as a senior executive at our cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency, working to strengthen the defenses of our nation's critical infrastructure. Everything from the water we drink to the energy that powers our lives to our telecommunications infrastructure to our hospitals. And we have some very real challenges. We have groups like ransomware actors locking up American hospitals, resulting in the deaths of Americans here in the homeland. We see China on our nation's telecom infrastructure and the ability to shut down critical infrastructure like we saw with Colonial Pipeline. We have real national security challenges ahead of us that we must be addressing and focusing on. But we've got to have people who are capable of understanding the complexity of those issues and what it's going to take to deliver real results to further America's national security interests.
Let's move on to the military. So right now we have Trump's deployment of National Guard troops in American cities. The U.S. president has essentially declared war on our own citizens. Your thoughts?
It is heart-wrenching to watch how this administration is using the American military as a political pawn and taking actions that are undermining the incredibly important apolitical nature of our military institutions. What I have tremendous faith in and confidence in is the professionalism and the responsibilities that I know the men and women in uniform have to the Constitution and to defending America. What is completely unacceptable is how this administration, enabled by Congress and members like Mike Lawler, have weaponized the executive branch against their political opponents. And that is the most un-American thing you could do. That is not who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Our military, our institutions, and national security transcend politics.
Mm-hmm.
It's about patriotism and keeping Americans safe, not partisan agendas. And this administration has betrayed that. And they've appointed unqualified individuals because they look pretty on camera to hold critical roles in our national security. And we are seeing consistently how unqualified they are in the decisions they make and in their own personal conduct. I am concerned about how far this administration is going to go in using the executive branch as a political tool, as a weapon against their opponents. Look, we saw this earlier this year. Donald Trump passed executive orders targeting the former director of my former agency, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, targeting Chris Krebs
Mhm.
because in 2020, he refused to back Donald Trump's lie that he lost the election, right? Like Chris Krebs refused to back Donald Trump's false claims that he won. And because of that, Chris Krebs has been a target of Donald Trump for the last several years. And now, when he's back in power, he's issuing executive orders directing the Department of Justice to investigate patriots like Chris Krebs, who did the
Mhm.
right thing and put country above politics.
Yeah. And when like a whistleblower like Miles Taylor too.
Yeah. And so this is where, again, Andy, like what we are seeing is fundamentally un American.
Do you think and I want to ask you about the Quantico thing in a minute, but aside from generals and admirals, which we'll talk about, rank and file, the troops, the people going in to the cities, the National Guardsmen, how much do you think they are aware of the right and wrong about what they're doing and what Trump is doing, what the administration is doing? Do they just see it as I'm in the military and I'm following orders, doing what I'm told? Do you think it trickles down on that level to how unconstitutional and, like you say, un-American, unpatriotic these actions really are? Do
I
you
mean,
hear anything from people that might still be in the military that you're close to?
Andy, I talk to folks who are out there, and the folks I talk to, it's definitely a spectrum of feelings where some are incredibly concerned and frustrated because, they rose their right hand and swore an oath to the Constitution to defend America against our
Hmm.
enemies. They're supposed to support and defend the American people, and they are concerned that they are being used as a tool against them,
And are
right?
being told now that the American people are our enemies.
All right, the Insurrection Act bullshit from
Yes.
Trump, like, so I think there's some that don't realize what's going on, right? Because they're just showing up and they're doing their job and they want to be responsible to the American people in terms of if I'm being told I need to go here to help protect Americans, I'm going to go. But I think this is where, you know, the the military leadership that is responsible for these formations understands what's at stake and they understand their responsibilities. And that transcends any person or political party. And so when we when we look at what is happening, it just breaks my heart because America deserves the most effective fighting force in the world. And that's what we have. And these folks should be training for combat, right? Preparing for war, not picking up trash in Washington, D.C., not directing traffic or
Hmm.
standing at posts. So these actions to further a political agenda are making America less safe because troops are getting pulled away from what they should be doing, which is
Hmm.
ensuring their combat readiness. So this goes back into the absolute hypocrisy of Pete Hegseth, where he sits there and blabbers about military readiness and toughness. And under his watch, you have troops out there serving as crossing guards when
Right.
they should be training for combat. That's on you, Pete, you know?
Well, let's talk about his shit show last week in Quantico. 800 plus generals and admirals. Some of them came from as far as 8,000 miles away. I can only imagine what must have been going through their heads when they listened to Hegseth and then listened to Trump and the takeaways. I mean, attacks on women, attacks on trans people, and fat generals, and using American cities as training grounds. I can't imagine a general not sitting there and going, "What the fuck am I listening to?"
It is such an insult to the professionalism and the sacrifice and the service of the men and women in that room. Um, they will never say that because they're professionals, but they
Hmm.
deserve better. And going back to, look, America has very real national security challenges right now.
Hmm.
And that is what these leaders should be talking about, should be focused on. We just saw North Korea affirm that they're going to continue expanding their nuclear weapons arsenal. We see Iran unwaveringly committed to building a nuclear weapon. We see a continued conflict in Ukraine, started by Putin, right? Attacking the sovereignty of democracy and then doing incursions into the sovereign airspace of NATO allies. We have very real threats. I talked about it earlier. We have ransomware actors, many of whom who are enabled by some of our strategic adversaries like North Korea, like Russia, who are conducting cyber attacks on our nation's critical infrastructure, extorting billions of dollars in costs, in ransoms. That is what America's military should be focused on, keeping America safe. Instead, you see the Secretary of Defense compensating for his fragile ego, going up there and pounding his chest about how tough things will be under his watch. A man who could not do this as a full-time job himself, right? He could have served active duty, and he didn't. And so when you look at this guy who has this incredible responsibility of being the civilian leader of our nation's armed forces, and he gets on that platform and makes an absolute joke of himself, it is an insult to the men and women in uniform, and my heart breaks for them because they deserve so much better. And I will tell you, as somebody who came up during the era of gender inclusion in combat arms, I started my career before we opened all combat arms branches to women. And as someone who graduated the top of my class at West Point, conducted all the same tactical exercises and tactical responsibilities, as someone who cut my teeth in some of the most elite military units in the world, we have gone out there and done the job, not as women, but as soldiers. And from the very beginning, as we pushed the envelope on complete inclusion and gender neutrality, all we ever wanted were gender neutral standards. Because our point is, we can do the job, period. And so for this guy to get up there and to make this ordeal out of expanding a handful of exercises and changing the scoring metrics on a test you take twice a year, congratulations. Like, are you kidding me? This is what you're worried about. What he failed to talk about is the fact that women have already been delivering in these jobs for over a decade. We see nearly 200 women who have gone through Ranger School in the U.S. Army proudly wearing the tab. That's as gender neutral as it gets, man.
Yeah, well, back to Israel for a second. Ask the Israelis what the armed forces would be like without women.
Yeah.
And this is not something that the world hasn't seen. And you said he's overcompensating, and you're right. And so is our draft dodger president. So the two of them lecturing these incredibly experienced generals and admirals was a total shit show. But I guess the most important question for me and a lot of people, and this is a hard one to answer because you really don't know. So it's really just your opinion. We know from the senior military officials back in the early 70s that because Nixon was an alcoholic, that there was this like unspoken rule that they all had. Like if this dude tries to push a button in the middle of the night when he's drunk, it's got to go through us. We also learned from Mark Milley after the first Trump term that there was a little pact that if this maniac tries to do something. In my opinion, the number one threat to our democracy right now is the United States president. And so then it becomes, okay, well, he's the commander in chief. What would the military do if given certain orders? We talked about the rank and file before. We've learned through history, it's all that I was just following orders shit, and perhaps on some degree, rightly so, because they didn't know any better. But the generals and the admirals, they know better. What are these people going to do when they're given the wrong orders? Like shoot people in Portland or Chicago or whatever.
Andy, my confidence in the military leaders and soldiers of this nation is unwavering. They will put America first. They will never falter in their oath to the U.S. Constitution. Our nation has seen really dark times. We have gone through these hard chapters where who we are as a country has been put to the ultimate test. And this nation for 250 years was built by heroes who, in those darkest of moments, chose to live with courage. That is the American way. And I have complete confidence that our senior military leaders will always do the right thing for this nation and uphold their oath.
So there's a lot more Mark Millies out there. We just don't know who they are right now.
I will tell you just my formative years as a West Point cadet. There was never a discussion over politics, right? It was about country. I
Hmm.
mean, our standing motto, duty, honor, country. That is what it means to put on the uniform. That is what it means to wear the flag. That is what our nation's military has proudly been built on for centuries. And I do believe that we will continue to deliver for the American people. And we do have our nation's best and brightest in those ranks who are doing this for all of the right reasons. And so, yes, I have complete faith in our military and our military leadership to do the right thing for this nation.
Yeah,
The other thing I'd say, though, Andy, is just this goes back to also where the Democratic Party needs to get our act together.
sure.
We have to retake the flag. You want to talk about the party of patriots? We are the people who also rose our hands and fought to defend this nation, the
Hmm.
red, white, and blue. And this is what I tell the folks in my district. Look, when I was putting my life on the line, I never cared how someone registered to vote or how they voted. You are an American, and I would do absolutely everything to keep you safe. And that is the type of leadership that we are seeing step up right now. That's why people like me are entering this arena. I never wanted to be in politics. Are you kidding? I'm doing this because I love this country. And this nation was founded on people who will live with courage and put country over politics. And that is what we have to ensure continues. And I think we need a lot more public servants and battle tested leaders in the halls of Congress and less politicians like Mike Lawler.
I couldn't agree more. And on behalf of a lot of people out there, I thank you for being the kind of person that has stepped up because we do need a change. And you're right. The Republicans screwing up is just one half of the battle. Democrats need to step up. We need regime change. The leadership is, I mean, Schumer. I have issues with Hakeem Jeffries. A lot of people do. This is the moment, the call to action. The House is on fire, and a lot of people just don't think Democrats are stepping up.
Andy, I had a front row seat the last 4 years, right? Between my time at the White House and then at CISA, working with members of Congress, working with committees. I mean, I've written federal legislation, I've overseen national budgets, I've had to execute them, I've had to answer for budgets in front of Congress, right? I've had to brief them on sensitive national security issues. And seeing that, seeing how disconnected the halls of Congress are from working class Americans
Hmm.
was such a point of personal frustration. And when I do see the failures of the Democratic Party, I oversaw the election security mission for the federal government last year. And after election day, a lot of folks, some very senior folks, asked me, what happened? Was it Russia? Was it Iran? Was it China? I was like, no, it was Democrats.
Exactly.
We lost America, you know? And I do believe part of it is we don't have enough people, working class Americans who are true leaders and public servants who've done the hard work. They're representing the American people and taking on these jobs and responsibilities. I think our party has too many lawyers and academics and policy people, and not enough people who've grown up in the trenches delivering and leading.
I
And when you
agree
talk to America,
100%.
come
Hmm.
on, and we suck at communicating because I don't believe people understand a lot of America. I am all about, so I think a couple big things. One, climate change is no longer a moral issue, it is a national security issue.
Hmm.
We see Americans dying, communities being displaced because of the effects of climate change. Stop talking about it as a moral issue. It is national security. How are we keeping Americans and American communities safe? But part of that, right, is when you look at energy, when you look at our need to drive progress, and to reduce the harmful impacts of energy development. We need to stop calling things like solar, wind, and geothermal clean energy or alternative energy. It's just energy, man. And we need more of it and responsible kinds to make sure we're having productive and positive impacts on America and not negative. And so when you saw things like the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill, where we were pumping billions of dollars into these types of what they would have called green energy, alternative energy projects, those were good things for America. But we absolutely did not message in the way that we should have. We keep thinking that if we're right, people will follow us. And I say, you shouldn't be focusing on being right. Be effective and have people walk with you, you know? And so when we did those bills, we should have gone out and said the first thing in every press conference to the generations of Americans who have worked the coal mines, the oil fields, and on the oil rigs, thank you. Thank you for your hard work for generations, for literal centuries, to power America. Because of you, American families were warm in the winter. Because of you, America is this economic powerhouse where we are driving global innovation. And to keep us on that path, we have to do more. We have to. So we're going to do more solar and geothermal and wind, and you're going to be part of it. But thank you, because we would not be the country we are today without you. Mm-hmm. Instead, we made working Americans, hardworking Americans, doing hard jobs, like working in coal mines, feel like they're the enemy. And they're like, look, all I'm trying to do is feed my family.
Right. Messaging.
So, yeah, messaging. And honestly, Andy, just having real people. Authenticity is priceless.
Yep. Well, look, this is the biggest compliment I can give you. I think if you went into a bar in the reddest part of your district and sat down and started talking to people, which I'm sure you're doing and will be doing more of, and you just started talking for an hour, the way we have, I think if you didn't tell people at the start of that conversation what your party affiliation is, to me, there's no way at the end of the conversation they could tell whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Because it's not about politics. We're all just the same in so many ways in terms of the things that we are concerned about. And I think the politicians that are going to be the most successful going forward are the ones who have that authenticity, but who also just aren't clobbering people over the head with their partisan ideology. And I still think there's a big part of this country, and certainly New York State, people in the middle. And they don't want to get involved in left bullshit or right bullshit. Like you say, they just want to feed their families and, go to a ball game and be able to buy a new car and not, have to worry about the shit we've been worrying about. And so I think you represent that very well.
I mean, it's why I'm doing it. I'm not doing it for one side or the other. I'm doing it because I believe in America and I believe our best days are still ahead of us.
Yep.
But we've got to fix the path we are on. And I do believe that politicians on both sides got us into this mess, and more politicians are not going to get us out of it. This is where we need battle-tested public servants. And this is going back to why I'm taking on Lawler. He is not that leader that our nation needs. He is the antithesis of it. He puts himself before all else, and that is wrong. And that is not what is going to lead this country out of this mess right now. And it goes back to, look, I'm not a politician. I'm a patriot, a proud public servant, and someone who will always do the right thing for this country. Period.
And if people want to support you, where do they go?
CaitConley.com. That's it. Just come check us out. Reach out to us. Follow us on socials. But we've got a really hard fight. But it's a fight that I know we will win because we are doing it for the right reasons. And at the end of the day, that matters.
Is there a primary date set yet for
next year? I don't think it's officially set yet. It's end of June. So we'll see what the field looks like. We still got a long way, but I will say, we are, because of individuals who believe in what we are fighting for, the amount of support, Andy, has truly been humbling. We are outraising the field. We've raised $1.3 million since launching at the end of March, and we're just getting started. And I could not be more grateful or humbled for taking on this fight for Hudson Valley families, for American families, because this district, as much as it's about the future and the fate of Hudson Valley families, the role this is going to play next year in determining the House of Representatives and who controls it cannot be understated. It was one of 3 districts last year, right, that went for Kamala Harris and Republican. And it is going to be hard to win. You cannot win it with just Democratic voters alone. To your point, we got to win people. My people, by the way, people like my family. And so this is a fight that I believe is noble and necessary, and super proud to be leading the charge in.
We'll keep up that good fight. And do come back and chat with us again. Update us on the campaign.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andy, for having me.
All righty. Take care.
Bye, Andy.